Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for a special Lunch and Learn session supporting Asian and APIDA students. My name is Gabe Javier, and I serve as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Identity, and Inclusion, and I'll be moderating the panel today. Before we begin, I would like to invite you to center yourself with your sense of place. If you're in Madison like me, you occupy the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk Nation. I invite you to reflect on the acts of displacement and migration that have brought us together today and focus on our shared future of collaboration and education. Media attention has shown a spotlight on anti-Asian and anti-APIDA violence and crime from across the United States, including the killing of 6 women of Asian descent in a mass shooting on March 16th. This violence is not new or uncommon, and according to stopaapihate.org, only a small fraction of anti-Asian hate incidents are reported. Today, a panel of student affairs professionals will discuss strategies for supporting Asian and APIDA students at UW-Madison. We'll explore some specific needs and cultural considerations when working with APIDA students and share strategies when talking about anti-Asian and anti-APIDA violence. As a reminder, there is captioning available for today's Lunch and Learn. Please see the link below. Also, if you have any questions throughout the session, you may put them in the YouTube chat. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then they'll each have an opportunity to offer some introductory remarks. First is Wei Chao. Wei Chao identifies herself as Asian and Taiwanese. She was once an international student in the US and Canada. She's an alumnus of UW-Madison. She joined Mental Health Services in 2018, providing bilingual mental health services. Most students she works with are Asian and or APIDA students. More than half of the students she works with are Mandarin speaking. She's also the health ambassador for International Student Services. Welcome, Wei Chao. Next is Tev Lee. Tev currently serves as the program coordinator for the APIDA Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Student Center under the Multicultural Student Center located in the iconic Red Gym. Understanding the intricacies that come with growth and lifelong learning, he hopes to continue working with and expanding the support and resources necessary to provide aid to students and the APIDA community at UW-Madison. Tev is an artist, a home goods enthusiast, an advocate for student success, and an educator at heart. Welcome, Tev. Kimberly View currently serves low-income students, first-generation students, and students with disabilities as an associate advisor for the Center for Educational Opportunity, also known as Ciao. Kim is Hmong American woman and first-generation college graduate of UW-Madison. In her work, Kim strives to address the diverse needs of students from historically marginalized populations by providing them with the space to contextualize their experiences and share resources that promote their success. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Gabe, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I am thrilled and honored to be on this featured on this panel with distinguished colleagues. I am not an expert on this topic by any means, and there's so much diversity within the APIDA community that I won't be able to speak on all experiences, but I'm excited to draw from my experiences working with pre-college students with the People program, college students with the Ciao program, and my own experiences as a first-generation college student at UW-Madison to share with you what I've observed along the way. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kim. I'd like to invite Tev to offer some comments.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. And, I think for me, by all means, as an educator at heart, I'm always learning and growing. And so I don't see myself as an expert, but I do see myself as an additional resource and support for students and anyone who is watching. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to engaging in this conversation with folks.
Thank you, Tev. And I'd like to welcome Wei Chao.
Hi, everyone. It's such a great opportunity for me to, I'm really happy to be serving on this panel. As in the opening, Gabe mentioned, my identity as a Taiwanese woman, international student once, and now as a sojourner, international staff, I definitely feel that my experience being living in 3 different countries, being exposed to different cultural experiences, offer me an unique experience and opportunity to learn about cultures, identities along the way. And hopefully I'm here to share my perspectives, providing some answers to questions that people may have, and also really hoping to find some more answers and questions for myself so that I can continue to explore and learn and grow.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. We're excited to learn from you all and to learn with you all about the resources and ways that we can support Asian and APIDA students. I know that we're going into the final week of classes and the finals, but it still is incredibly important that we think about how to continue to support all our students. And certainly with the amount of racialized trauma and violence happening, thinking about particular populations becomes as important as well. So, one of the first questions that I often hear, or I'm sure that you all have gotten, is about being an ally, right? So, Tev, I'd like to start with you, and then we'll go to Kim. But how can non-APIDA allies show their support to Asian and APIDA students?
Yeah, I think more often now I've been encountering this question a lot, and especially coming from students too, who are really searching for ways to support their APIDA friends or the APIDA community. And I think definitely something that I've been reflecting and hearing and thinking about a lot is just, if you're non-APIDA and you're wanting to support, I think the first thing is definitely to stop and listen, to kind of hear, what's the media portraying, what's happening currently in the APIDA community, right? And so, I know that most recently, there's been a lot of tragedy, a lot of violence towards APIDA, AAPI community, folks who identify as APIDA, folks who look APIDA. I think it's important to acknowledge that, us as a community, we're not a homogenous group. We are so diverse as a APIDA community, and I think a lot of the issues and a lot of the things that are currently impacting the APIDA community are folks who identify as East Asian or Central Asian. And so I think it's important for us to kind of listen and hear from APIDA folks about what their experiences have been. I think in terms of support, that looks and feels different for everybody. And I want to say that, support has to feel like it's not being forced. And so, I think if you're comfortable showing up for things, showing up for, if there's an organization that's, raising awareness about AAPI hate, and you're comfortable in showing up for that, please feel free to do that. If there's a march, if there is a post, something as simple as sharing stories and voices of APIDA narratives really helps. I think different ways to support looks and feels very different. And then the last thing that I want to kind of mention here too is just outreach. So, I always, when working with students, I always remind students that, when you hear of something, when something is impacting a certain community or even an individual, it's important to always consider that people are going through things that you may not necessarily understand, and even though there's an issue that's not directly impacting you, the likelihood and the chances are is that it's directly impacting somebody that you know within your sphere of influence. And so I think definitely outreach is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that really thinking about our spheres of influence is really important. You brought up this idea that we're not a homogenous group as Asian Americans or APIDA folks, right? Kim, wondering what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I echo everything that Tev had just spoken on. And I think that when providing a space for APIDA students to talk on their experiences and process it, it's really important to just validate their experiences and understand that they face racism, even though it may look different from what their other peers may be facing. So really giving them that space and giving them that permission to feel what they're feeling. Going a little bit deeper on what Tev briefly touched on is simply attending the cultural events. Right, this is something that I really want to highlight because there's a plethora of cultural events that are put on by the greater community, but specifically from our students on campus. Because we're not a monolith, there are so many different rich cultures that we could be learning about, and these students are on the ground working, putting up these cultural events with pride, showcasing their traditions to the community. And even if you feel uncomfortable, it's really important for non-APIDA allies and folks to be showing up in these spaces and just learning about the different and diverse ethnicities that exist under the pan-APIDA empire.
Great, thank you, Kim. Yeah, so again, really hitting on the idea that there are so many cultures in or under the umbrella or within the acronym APIDA, and even saying, that's why we're calling this panel Asian and APIDA students, because not all of the folks who are affected by violence and witnessing violence are Asian American, right? So our Asian international students needs support and allies as well. Wei Chao, I'm wondering if you can comment on that and what you've been seeing or hearing around how can people be good allies?
Yeah, I'm really glad. I appreciate you bring up that idea of not everyone identify with the specific labels that we come up with. Gabe, I've worked with international students who are not aware that they are a APIDA student. I think one of the things as ally and for ourselves as well to reflect on is how be intentional when we are thinking about how we identify ourselves when we are using specific labels for identities. What do we mean by that? I think for allies to support APIDA or Asian population, the really first step is start small. I think showing up for the events, reaching out to neighbors, friends, students. These are all very little steps that can start people with, and perhaps making the commitment to learn just a little bit about Asian American history, APIDA students, resources, whatever that's related to these topics each day, each week, starting small, showing up and really make that commitment, I think would be really important.
Thank you. I think that's really powerful, showing up, whether it be, and people show up in a lot of different ways, right? So showing up at events is certainly one piece of it. What I'll say is, like, as we show up, not to center ourselves, not as allies saying like, oh, I'm here as an ally, just to be there, be accessible. The sort of thing where you slip into a crowd and you sort of wave across to be seen, and knowing the impact of you just being there is really, really important. I want to, take this idea that APIDA and Asian students are experiences are not a monolith, and then overlay the experiences of UW-Madison. So I'm wondering if you all have reflections on some of the ways that Asian and APIDA experience at UW-Madison differs from other student groups. And, I'd love to hear, Kim, your experience in both people and Ciao, if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, of course. So first I want to draw from my experiences as an undergraduate student here at UW-Madison. Something that I've noticed is Asian American students finding a struggle to find visibility as students of color. They don't always feel a strong part of the student of color community umbrella, but they don't also fit under the umbrella of whiteness. So there's a struggle to find representation and visibility, not only outside of the APIDA umbrella, but also within it. Just because there are such diverse cultures, ethnic cultures underneath the APIDA umbrella, not only do non-APIDA folks have to show up to learn about the different ethnicities that exist under this umbrella, but so do APIDA students for their APIDA students that may be in different ethnic groups that they are currently not super familiar with. And I believe that this experience of being labeled as a model minority really contributes to the fight of visibility and being seen as a community group that belongs in the umbrella term students of color. This model minority myth pits Asian Americans against other communities of color, and it can also breed complacency within Asian Americans through perceived proximity to whiteness. And this is definitely something that you can see amongst the community within UW-Madison as well. And it really is a fight to be seen and a fight to really find that activist identity fighting against these myths and norms that have been pressed on Asian American students for so long.
Thank you. And I think that's really powerful to talk about the model minority myth, then how that the proximity to whiteness that many and some APIDA Asian people have, right? So thank you for your reflections on that. Tev, you're at the Student Center. So you're seeing through your work with the Heritage Months and other places, a lot of different Asian American student organizations and Asian student orgs, sort of mixing with and interacting with other student organizations across sort of the realm of experience. So what are some of your, the things that you've learned or seen around how the APIDA experience at UW-Madison differs from other student groups?
Yeah, first of all, I just echo everything that Kim had mentioned. I think that working with a vast variety of APIDA students, student organizations, fraternities, sororities, that these are conversations that we're always having. The APIDA Student Center, located in the Red Gym, now that we've transitioned virtually, we still are having these conversations and creating a brave space for students to come together as a collective to not only talk about issues that impact or affect their immediate Asian APIDA AAPI community, but also the APIDA community at large here found at UW-Madison. And so, we talk a lot about how the model minority myth has impacted our community, how that looks like here, how that shows up in spaces, in academia, in classrooms, and sometimes in the community when students are facing harsh realities of life that, unfortunately are things that are rooted within racism and stereotypes. And so I think that APIDA students are kind of going off of what Kim was saying, is that I think a lot of APIDA students over the years have been able to, because of this sense of belongingness and this sense or notion that APIDA folks or APIDA community and APIDA students are trying to find their place here on campus, essentially. I think that a lot of APIDA students gravitate towards within their own ethnic and nationalities to find that support. And then from there, they will then build bridges and connections with other APIDA folks because, like what we were saying, APIDA community as a whole, we're not a monolith, we're not a homogenous group, but yet geographically, we're kind of coupled together. And so we find ourselves in the situation where how do we support one another? How do we show up for one another as a collective APIDA community?
Yeah, that's so important, the sense of space, right? Like even the Red Gym space to serve such a diverse APIDA community can be very hard, because the needs are so diverse. Wei Chao, I'm wondering if you might be able to comment from your experience, and you work a lot with international students, and as we said, a large population.
Oops. I think we lost Gabe. I will talk. Most of my experience working at the mental health services is with international students from East Asian, Southeast Asian countries. And one of the things that I've been observing and experiencing is that sometimes students are really confused about being in the US, being exposed to these conversations about race, social justice, sense of belongings. A lot of the students, and sometimes even for myself as an international employee, trying to find a space where there's a sense of sort of in between, where part of us wanted to keep our identities, our tie with our home countries, and not quite sure are we fully accepted here in this country, and then also bear that expectations that we should be able to adjust to the culture and to work with what we have here in this country. So, and I think for a lot of international students, the struggle is that most of them are really grateful for the opportunity to be able to study here and to have the goal or the dream to build their life here. But they aren't quite sure how they fit in with all the narratives of, are we Asian Americans? Am I one day, will I eventually one day become Asian Americans? What does it mean when people refer to me as Asian population, APIDA students, what's expected from me in these social justice movement? How do I fight how do I advocate myself? So I think there's a lot of struggles and confusion, sometimes not quite sure where they fit in. Definitely the sense of belonging is something that I heard a lot from second generation Asian American students as well. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think those are the issues to be aware of when we have these conversations, to really understand the differences, the intersectionalities in these different populations as well.
Yeah, thank you, Wei Chao. That's a really rich set of considerations, especially around, my own experience. I reflect on my parents are immigrants from the Philippines. And so thinking about what it means to find other people like me and for community. So whether that be, talking about the experience what we had as growing up as the child of immigrants, or even finding similar food or cultural interests. Kim, do you want to add to that and talk about your experience speaking with students?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the reason why we really drive home the point that APIDA students and the APIDA community is not homogenous is because our APIDA students face different experiences with oppression depending on their specific ethnicity, how their parents or family has immigrated to the US. These are all factors that are important and play a big role in their success within the classroom. So you have students who come to college, aren't expected to be successful, but then also have to face off against institutional racism and other forms of discrimination or prejudice without the systemic support that some other student groups receive. The APIDA population in Wisconsin, the largest group of APIDA students in Wisconsin, or APIDA population in Wisconsin in general, is the Hmong Americans. And we don't fit into this model minority stereotype. But inside the classroom, there is often a consistent pressure to succeed without any sort of support. And you can really see it affect our Hmong American students with the statistics of retention within college in general, especially in Wisconsin. So these are things to really consider and often go back to the fight for visibility. Currently, there are a lot of Hmong students who are fighting for a Hmong American Studies program, and this has been a fight that has been existing since forever. And really, it comes to showing the administration that it's something that's important enough to implement, but also visibility for the greater community, even though they do exist as the largest APIDA group in Wisconsin.
Thank you for saying that. I know the work of the Hmong Studies group has been an uphill battle and really sustained, and I'm grateful to the activism of those students and the partnership with Asian American Studies. So thank you for offering that. As we opened and we talked, there's a lot of media going on. I mean, it is nonstop. So I'm always interested in strategies people have with how to manage that. Like, what are some strategies that you can share with Asian and APIDA students about coping when faced with media that negatively impacts them? Wei Chao, how about, can you offer some thoughts?
Yeah, there are a few strategies that I think of. I think the first thing to highlight really is when we are, a lot of the times when people see negative images or news on the news, one of the things psychologically it does to us is that it creates fear, anxiety, very strong emotions. And when these emotions occur, a lot of the times we can't stop, we can't help but wanting to know more information. And so that's when it then get into a lot of the students, or sometimes even myself, we get into sort of an autopilot kind of behavior where we just couldn't stop searching for similar news or images, and that creates a lot more anxiety. So what I would recommend, first of all, is that when we become aware of our emotions, that reactions, to really take a deep breath and acknowledge that emotions, and ask ourselves to pause for a little bit, to step away from the social media, to step away from the news, breathe a little bit. So that's the first step. The other strategy that I could think of is humor. When we are when we're viewing some of the negative images, impactful news, we want to take the issues seriously, and at the same time to cultivate our ability to also look at things, to also use humor, for example, satire, late night shows, to laugh about some of the realities, and then come back when we're recharged, come back to gear our energy towards advocacy, towards taking actions to make changes.
Absolutely. That's really great advice. That's really sound. It really resonates with me. The idea of doom scrolling, like you can just like fall down this rabbit hole and keep scrolling and linking and hitting link after link. So stepping away, finding something that brings joy. Absolutely. Tev, what about you? How do you tell people, or how do you offer people advice around coping?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to also recognize and acknowledge that sometimes the media doesn't always capture everything, and that sometimes social media is where we oftentimes find our news, or in this case, over the past year, we've now begun to see and make more visible and bring to light all of the anti-Asian hate and racism and violence that has been happening to the API or APIDA community, as well as Asians globally. And I think for me, an advice is that, definitely what Wei Chao is saying is that once you recognize and you feel that anxiety starting to kick in, I think it's important for you to kind of stop, take a deep breath, and then step away. I think that it's absolutely okay that, if you need to take a break from social media, I think that is absolutely appropriate. It's nothing that you should be ashamed of, or that you're saying that there's too much and that you feel like you're running away and that you have to always keep up with the news or everything that's trending. I don't think that that's the case. I think it's absolutely okay that when you feel that exhaustion coming on, it's especially hard if you are not able to focus and give 100% of who you are. So you're actually doing a disservice for yourself. I think that it's important for you to recognize and know those feelings and acknowledge them within yourselves. Take a step back. If you need to, remove yourself from social media for a little bit, just to kind of rejuvenate and recoup, I think that that's equally as important. So taking, definitely stepping in the realm of self-care is very important for your mental health and well-being.
Absolutely. Stepping in the realm of self-care should be one of the themes of this past year, right? And I think that, one thing that really sticks with me is the idea of it's okay, you're not missing out. Like, it's going to be there when you return. Kim, what about you? Any thoughts about helping students or advice on how to cope when faced with just an onslaught of media?
Yeah, I think the first question I would like to pose to APIDA students who are struggling with this is, first and foremost, am I giving myself permission to feel what I'm feeling with current events? I feel like racism towards the APIDA community is so normalized in so many small ways that is a question I've found more often recently that needs to be said, which is really sad to begin with. And building off of what my other colleagues have discussed, I think another point of advice I would offer to students is finding communities that will offer space for them to process how they're feeling, where they feel safe. And I think it's also important to understand that looks different. That could be an all APIDA processing space, that can be a community of color processing space, that can be ethnic specific processing space. And really importantly, as this is something that I've also personally been figuring out myself, is having a Asian American woman processing space. I think with the current events, we've really seen the intersections of the effects of racism, but also misogyny and sexism. And sometimes that does need to be discussed and processed in a space where it is all women or non-binary folks, because I think that makes a difference. And acknowledging that and honoring that and listening to what you need to process and heal is really important. And my last advice would be that rest is an important step of activism. And I think it's important that we never forget that.
That's beautiful, Kim. Thank you for saying that. The need to call into the room, this is the space that I need, right? This is and that's okay. It's okay to be really specific about the needs that we have. Wei Chao, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just wanted to add something. And by the way, I really appreciate what you just said, Kim. Asian American women processing space is absolutely needed. I'm going to bring that back to mental health services. Maybe that's something that we could also offer for students as a support group. In terms of dealing with the stress that comes from the media, I just wanted to add that I think it's also important for students to keep in mind that what's represented on social media or media's portrayal doesn't necessarily represent who you are, who we are, to really remember who we are by really connecting with communities that we trust, to reach out to the communities that we feel that we belong, to really reinforce that sense of whether that's self-confidence or to strengthen our identity can be a protective factors. The other thing is, I think, intentionally be active in looking out for resources, articles, reports, medias that show support for Asian and APIDA communities, so that we're not just a passive kind of recipients of negative representations.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And I love the idea of what are some of the protective factors, right? What are the things that we can do to insulate ourselves both individually and as communities, whether it be deep diving into our own cultures or APIDA and Asian cultures in general. And I want to explore that a little bit more, thinking about this idea of cultural considerations. So, Tev, I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about like what cultural considerations should someone keep in mind when working with Asian and or APIDA students?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we mentioned this earlier on, this notion of, the APIDA community is not a monolith. We have such rich and diverse cultures, and I think we're seeing that come to fruition and to light this month, especially in celebration of APIDA Heritage Month. I just want to apologize for not introducing that acronym earlier on in our conversation for folks who may be new to the acronym APIDA. APIDA stands for Asian Pacific Islander Desi American, and that's very important, and it was a very intentional usage of this acronym to be utilized here, especially at UW-Madison, because we wanted to utilize a very inclusive acronym to encompass our student body population, especially the Asian American body population, because oftentimes when we mention or talk about Asian Americans, historically, and also the media has always portrayed Asian Americans as East Asian, or physically the features are Central or East Asian. And so it does not bring to light South Asian, Southeast Asians, our Desi community especially. And so I think even our mention of the fight for visibility of the APIDA community, I think even within the APIDA community, there's a fight for visibility. And so I think it's very important that we continue having these conversations as a APIDA community to keep in mind that our cultures are very vastly different, and they're so beautiful and unique that when we bring them together, it creates and shows this bigger picture of what globally what we look like, whether that be it geographically or here in the US, when we're talking about Asian American experiences or APIDA experiences that, the APIDA Heritage Month theme this year is the spaces in between, and it touches on that in terms of navigating Asian experiences, ways in which we have learned about ourselves growing up, and things that we have picked up along the way that we need to unlearn in the process of accepting who we are and knowing our peers, and coming together as a community to be able to celebrate one another and to stand for one another.
Thank you. Yeah, so big shout out to APIDA Heritage Month. I think that there's still a keynote coming up this week, so that'll be really exciting. Kim, I'm going to go to you next. You mentioned that the Hmong population is the largest population of Asian and APIDA folks in the state of Wisconsin. So from that perspective or other perspectives, like what cultural considerations should someone keep in mind?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I think first and foremost, understanding the diversity of family and community backgrounds. Some Asian American students are first-generation refugees, and a lot of Hmong American students fall under that umbrella. And other APIDA students are fourth generation children of PhD. So like learning to overcome your inherent biases of what Asian American is or what they should be will allow you to support these different groups in the way that they need. And because APIDA isn't a monolith, I'm not able to speak on the experience of all APIDA or Asian students, specifically acknowledging my gap in knowledge and growing knowledge of international student populations. Thus, this serves as a really important reminder to myself and other professionals that cultural competency requires a lifelong process of learning and education, whether or not you're a newer professional like me or you've been in the field for decades now. That serves as an important reminder. And when it comes to Hmong American populations specifically, it's really important to look at the data that you see on Asian Americans and look at the disaggregated data so that you can really understand the gaps in educational attainment and income when it comes to Southeast Asian populations and also specifically Hmong American populations because they are the largest in Wisconsin.
Thank you. Thank you. That I love the complexity of the layers that we're talking about. Not only are Asian communities, APIDA communities, not a monolith, but even within, say, for example, the Hmong American community or the Filipino American community, the layers of experiences based on how close we are to our family's immigration story matters as well. Wei Chao, anything to add on that, on cultural considerations?
Yeah, you could probably, I don't know if my face shows that my mind's going all over the place. I think first thing that comes to mind is because of the diversity. Sometimes I think as providers, even for myself, being Asian, I need to remind myself just because I look Asian and being identify as Asian, it doesn't mean that I have all the knowledge about the Asian community or that I am automatically skilled in working with APIDA students. And so to be able to recognize and to own that even somebody who identified as Asian has limitations, even myself has to do a lot of learning. I hope this I hope our non-Asian, non-APIDA colleagues on campus or students to kind of recognize that, knowing that, it's okay to say that, I don't know. And there's much more for me to learn. And it's okay to ask questions. It's also okay to make mistake and remember those mistakes and try to improve and try to seek for more growth and improve our knowledge. I think the really important part is to recognize the diversity within even the Asian communities, and to really constantly remind ourselves not to impose any kind of assumptions when we're working with Asian and APIDA students.
Right. So hold our assumptions when we're working with Asian and APIDA students. And I want to return to that in a second. I want to ask you all your opinion about how that affects our outreach. But, one thing that I wanted to get to first that I mentioned in the open is that bias incidents and hate bias across the country against Asian Americans and Asians are underreported. Why do we think that is? Like, why do you think that bias-motivated incidents against Asian and APIDA students are so underreported? Kim, let's start with you.
I think that this often goes back to the model minority myth as well. It's a combination of the pressure to maintain that image and the false notion that Asian Americans are somehow safe from white supremacy as long as we continue to uphold a proximity to whiteness. I think this is a message that's been passed down to us by our community, also passed down to our parents, especially refugee parents or parents who are at the forefront of our immigration story to the States, simply trying to survive and make their way in a new country. And these are all things that we've internalized from all these different sources. And it's really important to acknowledge that all communities, regardless, and individuals, internalize this myth as well, really invalidating Asian American experiences with racism, because this prejudice can occur from individuals of all different races and all different ethnicities, rooted in this belief pushed on by white supremacy. So it's really hard to distinguish that, especially when it's been so normalized growing up. And then the last thing I would like to mention is the cultural barriers. For example, Asian international students are often confronted with these racist stereotypes, and being in a new environment can really naturalize that. And they can be targeted for things like hate and bias, but also things like scams, preying on the idea that they are vulnerable in a new environment.
That's incredibly important. Thank you for saying that. That many of our international students, not just Asian international students, but certainly all of our international students can be and have been victimized by scams because of the new environment that they find themselves in. Wei Chao, what do you think that bias-motivated incidents against APIDA students are underreported?
Yeah, I think there may be a couple of reasons. First of all, surely the lack of awareness or understanding of where to report. I've spoken with international students who was really surprised to find that they can actually report these incidents. And so, first of all, are we educating our students? Are we informing our students where they can file these reports? And, not knowing what happens next after they report the incidents. So, people not knowing what's the point of the report may be also a reason why people are underreporting. The other possibility that I think that could be is a learned helplessness. If they've experienced several incidents, report those incidents and nothing happened, nothing changed, eventually people stop reporting because they're not seeing the point. And so I think for our campus community, helping our students stay informed and really clearly address what are we doing these reports, what can come after that, is pretty important to get the message out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's incredibly important. So what happens after reports are filed? The idea of learned helplessness, like nothing's going to happen because I've done this before and nothing continues to happen. So note that we're dropping some of those resources on bias incidents and reporting in the chat of the YouTube too. So please check those out. Tev, do you have any thoughts around that? Why bias-motivated incidents are underreported?
Yeah, I think Kim brought up a really great point. We historically, the model minority myth has been perpetuating this sense of, that we're in compliance with whiteness, and that, as long as we're in compliance, nothing can go wrong or go bad, right? As long as we follow the rules. I think a lot of it too is like upbringing. I know for me, my parents have always told me that, earlier on in my education that, whatever the teacher says is right. And so, I have to kind of comply with what the teacher is saying, or, what the, leaders are bringing to my attention. And, I have to remain compliant with that. And so I think going back to what I was saying earlier about this whole process of learning and unlearning, that when you notice or when you recognize something like implicit bias, it's very first of all, definitely acknowledging it, and then unlearning, and then relearning. And I think that what Wei Chao said about when if students do report, but then there's really a lack of information about the follow-up, or what that report or what that data collectively is going to do for students to be able to understand that. I think if there's a gap in that, it definitely decreases the amount of reports that we would get in order to be able to do something about that. And so I think, I always encourage students that, it's important for you to share your story and to share what has happened to you. So that way, as a collective, we have a narrative that we can, bring up and raise attention for, to be able to do something proactive about it, instead of being, reactionary. I think that in a lot of situations, we tend to be very reactionary. But I think as a APIDA community, I know that students talk and the news and the word gets out there more often than what's being reported. And so I think it's definitely very important that the APIDA community continues to report these incidences. And so I think of an example of last year when, the chalking happened over on State Street leading up to Bascom Hill. Like, I think that incident definitely comes to mind when we're talking about unreported incidences. And I think that, it doesn't just have to be the Asian or APIDA community that's impacted that they report this, but I think for non-APIDA folks too, when they encounter things like this, I think it's very important for them to also think about reporting hate and bias incidences too.
Yeah, it's super important that if you're the witness of bias or hate, you can report as a witness, right? You don't necessarily need to have been the victim or even intended victim. But again, it goes back to understanding how the reporting works. So, in our last few minutes, I want to talk about some strategies, right? So we talked about how APIDA and Asian students are not a monolith, that even differences within culture. So how does that affect outreach? So can you comment on how the idea of not being a monolith, how that affects our outreach, and more importantly, how do we connect with students? Wei Chao, let's start with you.
Yeah, I kept thinking about this question too, and I don't know if I have all the right answers. I think first thing that comes to my mind is that we can't just do this within, say Asian Heritage Month. This is something that in campus programming and outreach that we need to consider how to constantly increase the visibility of Asian and APIDA community. Be intentional when we are creating outreach programs to be really specific and to be really intentionally and make sure that we explain what we mean by Asian and APIDA communities. Does it include international students? Who are we referring to? I remember a while ago, I was thinking about the term Asian Americans, and I asked myself, hey, what does that mean? Does that mean Americans like American citizens or Americans who live in this country? And so I think to clarify our message, to send a really strong message to students, this is what we mean, this is for you, is really important. I know a lot of international students struggle with the idea that, but I come from, for example, I come from China. What's the commonalities between me and that other international students from, let's say, Philippines or India or Japan or Korea? What's the commonalities here? Well, I think as we think about our outreach programming as a campus, we need to come up with, we have to help the students find their belongings and help them find that commonalities that connect people. So and I could probably add more if I think of something else, but for now, building the bridges for the students is kind of what's coming up for me right now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And again, like building those bridges, even, the makeup of our panel today, we know that we don't represent all voices, right? So Desi American voice or an international student even, so that's important to note. Tev, I know that you do a lot of connecting and outreach with students. Thoughts about how we do that?
Yeah, I think as the inaugural program coordinator for the APIDA Student Center, that was definitely a challenge that I faced. Is, I know for me myself, and acknowledging that I don't know everything that I should know or need to know in working with the vast population of APIDA students. And so I think for me, it's definitely, I'm tasked to program and to create programs and to raise awareness about APIDA communities in terms of what we celebrate, what are the issues that are faced against us. I think that it goes far and above and beyond just reaching out to students, but I think it also goes into the classrooms too. And I think an important piece of programming is definitely getting to know the students and being intentional about what it is that you are bringing to the table, or even bringing to the campus community. I think what Wei Chao spoke to is very important when I work with APIDA students, and especially with APIDA organizations, is that, each APIDA organization is very specific to their ethnic or nationality, that, it's a piece of the fabric that I'm bringing to the table, and being very intentional about, but also trying to widen the gap in terms of our understanding of each other as a community, so that way we can make those connections and build those bridges. And so, I think, like I mentioned, to go far and beyond that of just programming is also, encouraging students to take ethnic studies classes. I think that the Asian American Studies program offers a phenomenal and amazing ethnic studies required courses that students can take and learn more about, the experiences of Asian American here in the US, and then also expanding off of that, and just, in general, just supporting the expansion of ethnic studies courses for students to be able to take here at UW-Madison.
Thank you. Love the shout out to our Asian AM department fam. So lightning round, a couple questions came in through the YouTube chat. So one question is, how do you deal with microaggressions, particularly in the workplace? So, certainly, I'll start, and I think that one piece of advice is, as one of our panelists said earlier, is to find your allies, right? You need not face microaggressions alone. So think about taking space for yourself and wondering, because it may not be the best time in real time right now to address a microaggression. So find your allies that you can move back from the situation to get clarity. Now, if there's harmful language or hurtful language being used, that should always be interrupted in real time. Right, so that's important, but finding allies. So Kim, what do you have any nuggets of advice about dealing with microaggressions?
I think that you really hit it on the nail with finding your allies in your workplace. I think that another point I want to echo is just giving yourself permission to take up space. And also, when it comes to microaggressions, no matter how small, giving yourself permission to address it as needed, even if it feels uncomfortable and unnatural, because it's something that we've been putting up for so long. And then the last thing I would mention, which also goes hand in hand with connecting with students on an individual basis, is the fact that APIDA and Asian individuals have often felt pressure to anglicize their names or even come up with a completely new nickname. So also giving your space in the terms of honoring your name, everything that comes with it, and asking individuals to pronounce it correctly and not feeling bad for that.
Absolutely, the pronunciation of names is a huge one, right? And as an ally to other Asian or APIDA folks, like asking how would you like your name to be pronounced? And when I get it wrong, I always try to ask and always say, like, I got that wrong, and admit that, because I think it's not people always get names wrong, but most people won't correct themselves, and I think that's really important. Wei Chao, a piece of advice around microaggressions.
Yeah, first thing that come to mind is to, well, I think of this experience that I had years ago when somebody commented on my English speaking, saying that I have an exotic accent, that I sound like I not completely like an international person, but so accent. Um, and how do I respond to that is to ask, what do you mean by that? Inviting our conversation, interrupt that person so that person can have an opportunity to reflect on exactly what their comments mean. This doesn't apply to any context, but I think when I'm thinking about microaggression, it's not easy to detect, and sometimes people we need to take a pause and come back to that and try to have a conversation with people. But definitely building ally is also another important part. But I think the willingness to engage in further conversation also
Right.
is important.
Thank you. That's a great point. So asking like, well, what did you mean by that? So seeking to learn more information about the context. Good. Tev, advice around microaggressions.
Yeah, I think Kim and Wei Chao definitely brought up really great points in terms of how to, and you too, Gabe, about how to counteract microaggressions. I think I just want to echo what Wei Chao said in terms of asking for intentions and clarity. I think for me, whenever I encounter microaggressions, usually the individual who's posing that microaggression doesn't always know that it's coming off or across that way. And so I think for me, always practicing, in conversations that, folks are coming from a place of good intentions and good intent, and that what I can do is to ask clarifying questions and to really challenge those innate biases of why it is that they're asking these questions and why it is that they see that it's appropriate to pose these types of microaggressions. And so I think, going back to what I was saying, is that a lot of what we know and what we learn is from our surroundings and from the people that we're with. And so I think a lot of it has to do with acknowledging the fact that what you said or what you did was potentially harmful or caused harm to people, and acknowledging that and apologizing for it, and then unlearning that to relearn ways in which you can prevent microaggressions or prevent yourself from kind of imposing your implicit biases onto other people.
Thank you. I think that talking about implicit biases and the implicit biases that we all have and bringing them to the surface in order for us to address them is incredibly important. So thank you. So to wrap today, I'd like to invite you all to share a resource or two that you think are really important that you want our audience to know about. So I'll start. There's a great sheet of resources to support APIDA communities on the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement website, DDEA website. So if you go to diversity.wis.edu, you'll see a list of resources there that you can check out. Even if you're not Asian and APIDA, good resources to know about. Another one that I really like is a website called 18millionrising.org. That's another great place to get APIDA and Asian stories. Tev, what about you?
Yeah, so I'll just say the APIDA Student Center is a really great resource. I think that through our programming, through our connectedness with campus partners, as well as students and student organizations, we're definitely a really great resource for students who are looking to want to connect, or folks who are wanting to make connections. And so, definitely the APIDA Student Center is a resource that I would like to showcase and emphasize, because the APIDA Student Center started as an initiative of student activists who were looking and wanting to be more visible on campus, to create an intentional space meant for APIDA students on campus. And so, definitely raising awareness of the center in which I serve, as well as I think within the community. I think Freedom Inc. is a really great resource, especially now that we're faced with a lot of social injustices. I think Freedom Inc. is definitely a forefront when I think about leaders in the community, especially within Dane County. And so definitely I think Freedom Inc. is a really valuable resource that we have here within the Madison area.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for shouting out Freedom Inc. And you're right. The APIDA Student Center is the product of amazing students. So shout out Riley Tseng and Shannon Tao for their work when they were on campus. They're off doing amazing things now. As always, Kim, resources that you want to share?
Quickly echoing Freedom Inc. And acknowledging that the Asian Black tension that people always talk about is a lie. The Asian Black tension that we think of is actually white supremacy. And Freedom Inc. does a really good job showcasing to the community and broader, national level that organization that focus on Southeast Asian, Black, and queer activism is something that is crucial and something that's doing such great work on within the greater community. And then one thing I want to mention is, so during my undergrad, I joined an Asian interest sorority named AKD Phi, and that was crucial for me building my identity as an Asian American student. And I think it's really important for our students to find ways that they can continue to build their Pan-Asian identity. So really finding different communities that offer that, because at least for my personal experience, being second generation, when it came to being the only Asian person in the classroom or in a classroom learning about Hmong history, there was an intense pressure for me to know that information, and I was completely lost during the assimilation into the country. Losing touch with my mother tongue and understanding my people's history was something that I was learning myself, and it was a lot of pressure for me to attend specific ethnic-based communities and organizations because I felt like an outsider in some ways. So really, if you find yourself in the same position, find Pan-Asian opportunities to really first get to understand your identity as an Asian American or as an Asian, which will open the door to you really finding the different identities that exist under the umbrella, and as well as your own ethnic group.
Thank you. Thank you for shouting out your Asian interest sorority and how important finding that community has been. Wei Chao, last word around finding resources.
University health services, mental health services is definitely here for students, particularly for students when you reach out. If you're looking for providers who hold specific identities, doesn't have to be Asian, APIDA. We also have providers who identify as people of color. We have providers who identify as LGBTQ specialized. And so reaching out, voice your needs based on the identities that feel salient to you. And I definitely want to highlight that resources. We do also have group therapy, support group, processing space. Those resources are available on our website. And I do want to mention two pieces of learning materials for people who are interested in learning more about Asian American histories. One of the things is PBS has a really good program that's called Hate is Learned, tracing the history of anti-Asian violence in America, 1 hour available on YouTube. Great resource to learn, to have a history lesson. The other the other resource that learning material that I appreciate is an NPR piece. The title is called Our Own People. It's through NPR Throughline podcast, talking about, they reflect on activist Yuri Kochiyama's ideas about Asian American struggles. So
Very cool.
I really recommend those resources.
Awesome. Very cool, connecting to history and through line. Absolutely. So for all these resources and more, they'll be in the YouTube chat, as well as you can check them out in the captions for today's video, which will be available at the link after the live event. So I want to thank our panelists and all of you for coming to today's Lunch and Learn. We hope that you've learned a little bit more about how to outreach and care for our Asian and APIDA students this week, next week, and going forward. So on behalf of Student Affairs and other staff represented and DDEA and Health Services, thank you all so much for coming, and good luck with the rest of the school year and finals.